It's time to stop swallowing that blue pill of corporate manipulation and remove the blindfold to a world not fabricated and mind-controlled by the media.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Step into the light. Discover the truth. It's time for a reality check.
Reality check. Reality check. Reality check. This isn't something you need to be afraid of.
Now, two of the most controversial views of the paranormal, as well as conspiracies, you'll ever hear. The hosts of Reality Check, Jessica Johns and Joey Mirabella.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of Reality Check. My name is Joey Mirabella, and I am here with Facebook bikini model and my co-host, Jessica Johns. In case that nobody knew.
I hate you.
You so don't hate me for that.
That was hilarious. That's like the time that I introduced you as sex symbol Joey Mirabella.
I know. Now it's your payback. Now it's your payback.
Oh, karma. What a funny thing.
But it's a good way. It's a good karma. So, tonight we are going to be exploring the details in the Lost City of Atlantis. In fact, we have found a lot of information to hone in on where the real location may be. There's scientific evidence to prove it. Before we get into this, I would like to hype everybody up about a new show on KCOR Digital Radio Network that is going to be hosted by a really good friend of ours over in the UK, David Cook. It's called The Ghostly Hour. He is going to be airing this Sunday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, and he's going to be talking all about ghost stories, his own personal experiences, taking any questions or comment stories from anybody who wants to call in. It's going to be awesome. He's a really interesting guy, has a lot of knowledge, so definitely tune in. And Jess, we're going to dive right into Atlantis right now. Why don't you give us a little bit of information on where this all started from?
Okay,
the stories.
well, what most people think is that it started with Plato, but I'll get into that in a little bit.
Plato, the Greek philosopher. We're not
yes.
talking about the kids, Plato.
Thank you, Joey.
You're welcome.
I think they got it.
No, I just wanted to say something stupid.
Well, we take turns saying things like that.
Of course.
All right, so Atlantis, the definition that I have is a fictional island mentioned within an allegory on the hubris of nations in Plato's works Timaeus and Cretias, where it represents the antagonist naval power that besieges, quote, ancient Athens, the pseudo-historic embodiment of Plato's ideal state. In the story, Athens repels Atlantean attack unlike any other nation of the known world, supposedly giving a testament to the superiority of Plato's concept of a state. At the end of the story, Atlantis eventually falls out of favor with the gods and famously submerges into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, again, so I'm going to get into, I just mentioned that Plato gets a lot of credit for the story of Atlantis, but really, Plato, it was kind of like a game of telephone.
It goes a lot further back than that.
Way
right?
further back, like thousands of years. Plato didn't hear the original myth of Atlantis, but instead it was told to Solon 300 years prior, who heard it from Egyptian priests who read it from existing texts. Plato heard it from Cretias, who is related to Solon, who said it was a story passed down for 3 generations prior to reaching him.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
just passed
right.
down.
Way passed down.
I think
yeah.
it was like something about 9,000 years.
Something about that. 9,000 years before Plato, the time of Plato, and after the people of Atlantis became corrupt and greedy. The story goes that the gods decided to destroy them and did this by shaking the land. Giant waves rolled over the shores, and the island sank into the sea, never to be seen again. Of course, that's the mythological story where they added the gods in and everything like that. Now, there was the thought that this was made up by Plato to teach a lesson. That's where the people kind of dispute whether we should be wasting time looking for this place or assuming it's real or not. Now, in a lot of points in the dialogue, Plato refers to his story as genuine history and within the realm of fact. And him saying that is pretty legit because he was a philosopher and
right.
for the most part tried to be factual, but he did write his stories. And there's a ton of detail in the stories that would be unnecessary if it was just going to be used as a literary device, right?
Well, many people use Plato's works as like a map.
Yeah.
To find Atlantis, and so there are many places that people believe Atlantis actually exists. If they they're following their own interpretations of Plato's story.
Right. Well, there was also, did you happen to hear that there was a historian named Strabo, who was Plato's student Aristotle, who says that Plato's student Aristotle remarked that it was created by Plato and all made up to illustrate a point, but that was written by this guy Strabo, but those actual writings that he's talking about that Aristotle wrote were lost eons ago, so they never actually found them.
Right.
So again, we can't go off of anything that we don't have any solid evidence of.
Right.
Which is, well, where's the dilemma? Where is Atlantis, Jess? Well, why don't you go over some of the ideas that we've found here?
Okay, so going back a few weeks, when we talked about the Bermuda Triangle, we kind of mentioned a little bit Bimini Road.
That's right.
In the Atlantic Ocean near the near the Bahamas. Now Bimini Road, the thing about Bimini Road, it's these underwater rectangular slabs that form a path like in the shape of a J, and many Atlantis hunters believe that it leads to a hidden temple, but thousands and thousands of years ago, the island of Bimini, the tide was low, and those are actually just beach rocks, and they were just a whole natural formation. So there's nothing. I mean, that's the only thing that that explains that. So Bimini Road debunked.
We're getting rid of that one.
Crossing that one off.
Toss it off.
Here's a little fun fact for you, though. In the 1940s, the Nazis actually looked for the lost civilization of Atlantis in Tibet.
Interesting. I wonder what led them there.
I have no idea, but I guess we'll get into that further another day. And then, so then some people believe that like the story of Atlantis was inspired by the Minoans in the island of Crete when a volcano erupted on the island of Thera, and it caused this big tsunami, and it swallowed most of the Minoans off the island on the island of Crete, and I guess that that inspired the whole like underwater civilization since they were swallowed up by the water.
What did they tell you? What year did you find out that happened? Like,
I think that was the one that was like 9,000.
That was right around the right time.
Right. And the Minoans, they were a super advanced society with technology that was way ahead of its time. And then because it was, I guess, the 130 miles off the coast of Greece, that was the island of Thera where the volcano erupted, which caused that tsunami.
Right. Okay.
But they also have like, but there's another part of like Thera, like the central part of the island of Thera, like disappears. It totally disappeared after the volcanic explosion.
So this is in if people were to look at a map right now, where in modern geography would they be looking to find what you're talking about?
Mediterranean Sea, like near, like Greece. I want to say. I think it's near because like the island of Crete is like
close.
Right.
Yeah, close to Greece.
Yeah, geography.
We're not the geography geniuses.
I didn't do well in that class.
There's a lot of ancient cities we're going to talk about that are renamed now that we're going to also be mentioning the modern names of, just so you know where we're talking about.
Yeah. So Plato, because Plato has Atlantis sinking 9,000 years before his time, but the disaster struck 1,000 years before his actual story. So think this way. I mean, Plato's talking about something that happened 9,000 years before him, okay? And we're talking about Plato, which was in the last couple of thousand years, and his story. Imagine how much between 9,000 years leading up to Plato and his story could have happened, prior to that. I mean, 9,000 years is a lot of time. 10 years is a long time for things to change. So just imagine how much that story could have changed or where it could have been adapted from. So where could this be? Well, all nations of all times believe in the existence of a primordial paradise. If you look at any ancient history, they all believe in a primordial paradise where a man originated and developed the first civilization ever. And this is traditionally called Atlantis or Eden, as we've heard before. Ooh.
Eden's another one. Yeah. So you've heard that Garden of Eden. I mean, it's been used on a lot of things. Now, Indonesia and the neighboring lands of man, after immigrating from the semi-desertic savannas of Africa, first found the ideal climatic conditions for development. And this is where agriculture and civilization were invented. I mean, we're going way back. This was during the Pleistocene era which is the last of the geological eras and ended about 11,600 years ago, which would probably be around the same time that we're saying 1,000 years before the 9,000 years ago from Plato's story, right?
Yeah.
So this falls right into that exact time period. Now, Pleistocene is Greek for the most recent. It's also called the Anthropozoic era or the Quaternary era or the Ice Age, as we know it. That's probably the most famous thing people know about it at this point.
Speaking of Ice Age, there's another place, like that's another place on the list that people think Atlantis is located, Antarctica.
That's that one I can't really wrap my head around. That's the one I don't really quite, that doesn't sync up. I found nothing on that.
Did you hear about the one in Spain?
Spain, no. Did you found out some stuff about Spain?
I found out some stuff about Spain, like, and it's like nowhere in. I know, like, again, I didn't do well in geography, and I always said that if I had been hunting ghosts back in history class, or back in high school, I'd have better grades in history class.
Yes, but, not hunting ghosts in history class. Just to
but you know what I mean. No, but funny. Like, so here's some stuff on Spain. So in southern Spain, there's a large marsh called Doñana Park that archaeologists,
okay.
How come I can never
so
ever
not archaeologists?
Talk big words.
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists.
No, Jess, that's what I'm here for, to help you pronounce the big words. Hey, some of these names of people I couldn't even pronounce this time.
So that archaeologists believe that buried in the marsh is the Lost City of Atlantis. And in 1922, there were two archaeologists proposed that Atlantis was buried within those mudflats. And then in 2004, a German physicist named Rainer Kuhn took satellite images of those mudflats and found strong circular patterns. He compared these circular patterns to Plato's description and became convinced Atlantis was buried in southern Spain. He believes that the circular patterns fit Plato's measurements, because Plato describes the two temples in the center island of Atlantis, and one of them is dedicated to the god Poseidon. So Kuhn finds a rectangular anomaly on his satellite image, and according to its dimensions, it fits the description perfectly or Plato's description perfectly for Poseidon's temple.
Okay.
And so then one of the big circles is connected with several rectangular structures, and so those structures possibly have a wall below the shapes in the soil, and they believe that they're buildings like underneath all these mud flats, like these. I think it's like, I can't remember how many like square miles. I think it was like maybe 30 or something square miles of mud flats.
I wouldn't
and
even
marsh.
try and guess.
Yeah,
that
they believe the city of
so
Atlantis
this guy
is
saying
completely
that
buried
it's under these mud flaps near Spain.
basically,
is what he's saying.
in southern Spain.
Now, the Poseidon thing is significant because you have to understand Poseidon was the god.
He was the god of the water,
of
god
the
of
water.
the sea.
But there was also in Plato's writings, he talks about the temple of Poseidon that was in the middle of Atlantis, where he apparently had there was a golden statue of Poseidon where he had his 6 golden horses, or the winged horses. That's also another thing that's written about, and the whole story was that he fathered 5 sets of twins on the island. The firstborn was Atlas, who had the continent and surrounding ocean, and he divided it into 10 sections, which were to be ruled by his son or by his heirs. So that's why Poseidon's pretty relevant in this whole thing whenever he comes up. So Spain, that's an interesting one, because I didn't find anything about Spain.
I didn't find anything about Indonesia.
I found so much on Indonesia, Jess. Like, okay, well, this is where we're going to get into this. Now, there's always the talk of Atlantis. What happened? It's underwater. It sunk underwater, or it flooded or something. Well, it didn't sink, okay? During the glacial episodes, at about 20,000 year intervals, the sea level was 100 to 150 meters below where it is in this day. Okay. Right. Continental platforms became exposed and land bridges formed connecting many islands and regions. This is at the lowest point the sea was at that time. Now, the most dramatic of this took place in Indonesia, where humanity first flourished. I know. I can't pronounce my own words.
I'm not the
now.
only one.
You're rubbing off on me, Jess. It's not good. First flourished. The expansion of the South China Sea formed an enormous continent that was larger than Asia Minor and Libya put together, and that's what Plato affirmed in his writings on Atlantis as Cretaceous, right?
Yes.
that it was bigger than the Asia Minor and Libya put together, which is freaking huge because Libya is with northern Africa. So the end of the Pleistocene Ice Age, glaciers that covered the northern half of North America and Eurasia melted away, drained to the sea. It forced the levels to rise about 100, 150 meters, and thus Atlantic sunk away below the ocean. So the sinking of Atlantis shouldn't be taken so literal. It was more the flooding of the oceans from the melting of the glaciers that caused the city to be submerged, right? So there's Lemurian Atlantis. Now or Lemurian Atlantis, which is the larger of the two mentioned by Plato. Now, Lemuria was a vast prairie which Greeks called the Elysian Fields, which you may have heard of. I think that was the name of the album by, what's it called? Is that the one, Soundgarden? Am I thinking it right? When they did Black Hole Sun?
Dude, I don't know. But
you know that
hey,
song.
Listen, I had that little fun fact about David Grohl and the Foo Fighters, and
that's right. The Foo
I
Fighters.
knew this. I knew that. I don't know this.
I remember seeing the album. Something's called Elysian. I could even be wrong. It might not even be that album. It could be Megadeth. I could be totally off. I don't. So fact check that one for me. But anyways, the Elysian Fields, and the Egyptians named it the Field of Reeds, or the Ancestral Land, and this became the land of the dead, where no one ever ventured after it flooded. That's what they started to call it. There was no one supposed to go there because they didn't come back.
Like the underworld.
It all ties into those same stories. So the Ancestral Land, okay, was Dravidian name of Sumatra, the island where the Hindus placed their pristine paradise, as they called it, which was also sunken in a cataclysm. So this story of something being sunken in a cataclysm, you also see in Hindu writings.
You know, I'm really enjoying this. I feel like it's story time.
It is story. It's kind of story time.
So, you know.
Are you enjoying the story?
I actually am really enjoying the story.
All right.
Because, like, most people, like, this is how Joey and I kind of do things. We don't discuss what we're researching. I mean, we have a topic, and then you'll do your research, and I'll do mine, and we have completely separate information.
Well, not every. I mean, sometimes yes. But most of the time, like, we find a lot of the similar.
Right. Well, I mean, when we did Titanic,
things.
we both watched the same things and did pretty much on the same page with that.
That was all pretty. And anywhere I looked, I found a lot of that same information, anyways. But
right.
But anyways, back to story time with Joey here. Okay.
Get your milk and cookies.
Jess, raise your hand next time you have a question. Okay, this is story time. Thank you.
Time.
Please, I'll call on you when I'm ready. So. No. Anyways, So the sunken in a cataclysm. So the gloomy place that remains above the water was named Sheol, or Hell, by the Jews, and in spared areas the island of the blessed, or Hades, by the Greeks, which you said Hades, right? You said the underworld,
right? Ooh,
right. So there you go. Amenti, or Punt, by the Egyptians, Dilmun by the Mesopotamians, and Hawaiki by the Polynesians, and Svarga by the Hindus, and so on. So this same area is called all these different things by all these ancient cultures, but they're all talking about the same area. Okay, the Celts called it Avalon because they associated it with the Holy Grail and the resurrection of their dead heroes. And then all of these cultures fled from this submerged land that they talk about. So you have the now this is a tough one because I couldn't even find pronunciation for this word, but it's like Ivimarani. It's like Yvymarani. I mean, this is one of those words. The Ivimarani of the Tupian Indians of Brazil, the Aztlan, or the Aztatlan of the Aztecs of Mexico, and the Tollan of the Mayas of Yucatan all flee from this submerged land. For anybody that knows, these are all our oldest civilizations that we get history from. So that's what makes this pretty interesting, is how much this goes back.
I feel like I should have started this with, it was a dark and stormy night.
It's a dark and stormy night. Well, pretty much. But you know, when you're talking about the explosions of the volcanoes erupting and the tsunamis, the flood is what also caused those to happen. Okay, because if you're flooding volcanoes, it's a cataclysmic event. That's what happens. So
it's always one thing leads to another. And
but they coincide.
It's always Murphy's Law. What can go wrong will go wrong.
Yes.
So let's just throw all the natural disasters in one: tsunami, volcanic eruption, floods, tsunamis.
But they all did happen at once at this time. That's what's crazy about this, and
like
that's where
Judgment Day or something.
Kind of it was. I mean, it was supposed to be a Judgment Day for if you go to. All these ancient scriptures talk about a flood, right? I mean, you can go to the Noah's Ark story and the flood.
Because that was my thought when you were talking about the flood. I was thinking
punishment for the sin of man.
I thought
right?
that was I thought that was probably what part of the Bible they were referring to, is like Noah's Ark, with Noah's Ark and everything.
No, they will, and I actually have more on that at some point.
More on that later.
It's a long story.
We're going to break
more
in
on that later. Well,
in a couple of minutes.
We got a few minutes.
Yeah.
So, the greatest of all the Lemurian colonies, Atlantis, was founded in India. Atlantis and Lemuria prospered for a full zodiacal era of 2,160 years before the flood happened. Now, all the survivors were forced to flee, moving first to India, the site of Atlantis, which is where I found, and I really believe that's where it is based on so much of the info here, this part of India had been spared in its northern portion. But the Himalayan glaciers also melted at this time, which caused a huge flood of the rivers of Asia and made it unfit for human habitation at the time. So the floods ravaged the remainder of Atlantis. Indonesian volcanoes caused firestorms and tsunamis, and a plague that ravaged the country in the wake all occurred because of this flood. So that's where we get to what you were talking about. So now you have people flee, emigrating to places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, Palestine, North Africa, Europe, North Asia, the Near Orient, and even Oceania and the Americas. Some came on foot in huge hordes like the Israelite Exodus. Others came by ship like Noah and his ark, or Aeneas with his fleet, to find all our greatest civilizations of the world. Now,
so I asked you this question earlier. So Atlantis, the civilization of Atlantis, that's our oldest civilization.
What I'm trying to explain here.
That was our first civilization after.
After our prehistoric ancestors, right?
Yes.
So yeah, what Jess is saying is that Atlantis, we're about to go on break here. Atlantis, the Atlanteans, Atlantic civilization predated all modern known civilizations that we know of. But before that, we were pretty much primordial savages, when Homo sapiens, Homo erectus. There's no civilization from that. There was no. But anyways.
So if you want to give us a call and join in our Atlantis discussion, the number is 702-425-9230. If you want to listen live on your phone, dial 605-475-1680. And on Twitter, KCOR Radio, at KCOR Radio, and use hashtag KCOR, and we will see everybody. Well, I guess
stick around.
We don't see anybody, but
to quote Emerald Lagasse, stick around. We're going to kick it up another notch when we come back.
Once again, it's time to cross that line of deception and bring you a reality check.
They're serious. They mean what they're saying.
With your mesmerizing hosts, Jessica Johns and Joey Mirabella.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Lost City of Reality Check. I'm Jessica Johns, sitting here with Joey Mirabella, still
here.
And real quickly, I do want to say this. I just heard the commercial for the Ghostly Hour. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty pumped about that.
I'm pretty excited too.
So good luck to David. I'll be listening while I get ready for work. So I want to get into okay, I mentioned earlier how most people have interpreted Plato's writings about Atlantis and used them as their own maps as to where they believe Atlantis is. But this is how Plato kind of described what the city of Atlantis once looked like. Okay. He described it as that it was an island kingdom with land rings. It was just this, almost like a target. It was this circular thing.
It looked very symmetrical from pictures that I've seen.
Right.
So, yeah.
It was circular. Yeah, it was circular harbors, and it was just beyond the pillars of Hercules. And I found that the pillars of Hercules were located in the Straits of Gibraltar. But Joey, you had the pillars of Hercules located somewhere else.
Well, yeah, I'll get into that when I go back to my Indonesia storytelling, because I'll explain that towards the end.
Okay. But there were a few things that I kind of skipped over that I meant to get into with Bimini Road too. Again, this is why Atlantis is not at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. We're in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. They actually discovered 2 more slabs of those rectangular rocks I was talking about. They discovered 2 slabs near the island of Bimini, but it was a type of rock that was not normally found in the Bahamas. So they believe the slabs were transported into the Bimini area, but no one knows how they got there. But, and they thought that the slabs were of Bimini Road were man-made, but it was proven to be a beach rock that formed when the sea level was lower. But that whole Bimini Road underneath in the Atlantic Ocean was discovered in the 1960s, but that same formation was actually found in the Florida Keys. So that's how they kind of were able to like put together. It was all like natural and
kind of drifted from that area.
Yeah,
possibly.
it was just naturally made. It wasn't anything man-made. There's no like conspiracy behind these slabs of rock underground. They're just beach rock formed when the island was lower.
Interesting.
But the slabs found were parts of rocks that were used as building rocks that had fallen off a ship like 50 years ago. So because they were able to like use carbon dating to date those rocks that were found that weren't supposed to be there, and they found that they're only 50 years old. So nowhere near like the time of Atlantis.
Not even close. They're only 50 years old.
Right.
Not even
and
close.
Atlantis was like what, 9,000 years old. So
Well, from this area, 11,600 years.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So right.
Yeah. It's a little different there. 50 years,
50
11,600.
50 years and 11,000 years.
It's close enough. So.
Big difference.
Totally. So, do you have any more on Bimini Road?
No.
Because that's interesting. I mean, because we had heard that was one of the initial things we found was that there was theories that Bimini Road led to Atlantis at one point, but it just did not.
I mean, I have a list. I have a list of places that people have thought that Atlantis was, and their own interpretations, like I said, of Plato's writings.
The last one.
I'll save the last one. I will save the last one.
Because we mentioned it in another episode.
3 weeks ago, we kind of brought it up a little bit. Doggerland in the North Sea, Sweden, the Canary Islands, the Madeira Islands, and Antarctica. So there's one more. And I'll save it for later.
This is what makes this really interesting is that, well, why are there so many different theories as to where this freaking city started, and why is that? Well, if we're going by a lot of this Indonesian research, it explains that because they all started in one place, but the people had to disperse during this flood, right?
Right.
So, the great civilizations that we know of in the Indus Valley in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, Greece, Rome, Mexico, even the Americas, they were all Atlantean colonies founded by the survivors of the cataclysm, the flood that destroyed the twin paradises of Atlantis and Lemuria. Now, the colonists, of course, when they all dispersed, they attempted to recreate their Eden in a new homeland, and they named each topographical feature after the archetypes of the new untouched home, just like modern-day immigrants do, nowadays or up to nowadays. Same kind of deal. And that's why we keep finding remnants of Atlantis everywhere, from Brazil and North America to Spain, Crete, even Africa, North Europe. So all these ancient civilizations spoke of civilizing heroes. Cheerios. I'm like saying heroes like Cheerios. A bowl of Cheerios for everybody. Spoke of civilizing heroes.
Cheerios.
Such as Manu, Noah, Aeneas, Theoannis, Hodu, Matua, Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Bochica, and then, of course, Atlas and Hercules.
I'm really impressed.
By all those words?
Yeah.
The omnipresent.
That you were able to pronounce them. Way to go, because I would not have even tried. I wouldn't have
I think Quetzalcoatl is the hardest one to pronounce.
Yeah, I'm actually that was the one I was like, good job, Joey.
Yeah, that's what's also the name of a dinosaur. That's why I knew that one, Quetzalcoatlus. I've known that since I was a kid, strangely. That's why I had a dinosaur fascination growing up. Did you watch Land of the Lost and I did not.
And shows like that?
I did not watch that.
Because I totally did.
I didn't. No, I was all about my Jurassic Park and then also just reading about that stuff. So when we do our dinosaur episode.
Oh, that would actually be kind of cool to do a dinosaur episode.
It would be interesting. It would be.
Because, there are still dinosaurs, like alligators and crocodiles, I think, are considered.
The closest living ancestor of dinosaurs that we can find is the crocodile.
Right.
The alligators.
That could be interesting.
It would be interesting.
So getting back on Joey's story time. Or story time
now
with
I'm thinking
Joey.
about dinosaurs here. So, but anyways, so Atlas and Hercules and the omnipresent twins that founded civilizations everywhere. That's what the Greeks called Atlas and Hercules, right? So, this is why. So we have all these areas of the world. Where the hell is Atlantis? Well, experts.
I love Greek mythology.
Well, there's still people to this day searching for this city, right? Well, experts have been searching the wrong areas of the world because no one's really searched the Indonesian areas of the Indian Ocean. Now, legends of civilizing heroes, angels, gods, or even demons and monsters are told by all people of the world. I mean, every ancient civilization talks about these kinds of things and how they were taught by them. Religion, law, agriculture, metallurgy, and the alphabet. The fallen angels, as they call them, are not astronauts or sprites, but men who came as missionaries from Atlantis, which calls into question, well, how were they able to mate with the human females and breed children? Well, this is why. They were all refugees going from Atlantis after the cataclysm. So then this is where we get into some this is where it coincides with, well, where do some of these Bible stories that we hear about come from? The mysterious sons of God of Genesis 6 are precisely the same ones identified by Plato with the Atlanteans. Their sin with the daughters of men, and more probable, the rejection and enslavement of their hybrid offspring led to the flood, which is where that same concept of the sin of man, that was the whole thing, Noah's Ark and the flood. Why did that happen? Well, that was stemming from Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, right? Eden, same thing. They ate the apple, which they were told not to do. Original sin, that's where that all comes from.
Oh, it's so neat. It just all ties in together.
That's what it all leads back to Indonesia, which is why I'm so bent on this being the actual location. It is indeed the mysterious original sin that resulted to the destruction of paradise, or Atlantis as we're calling it, and the fall of man. This sin is the one ritually washed by baptism, which Catholics and Christians undergo, which itself is an allegory of the flood, as St. Jerome and other church patriarchs explicitly acknowledge. Now, Plato quotes precisely this cause for the destruction of Atlantis by god Zeus at that time and his unfinished dialogue on Atlantis, the Cretius. And the same story in allegorized form is also told by Homer concerning the Phaeacian sons of God. It also factors in the Celtic myths concerning Mererid, the sinful daughter of King Gradlon, whose scabrous conduct led to the sinking of the land of Wise, so on in the Americas and elsewhere. And the Bible speaks of two creations, exactly as Plato also tells of two different Atlantises in Genesis 1 and 2. So moreover, the Bible also tells of two destructions of the world by the deluge. These two different narratives are oddly embroidered on each other in Genesis 6 and include the Elohist and the Jahavist accounts of the flood, which relate two visibly different events. I mean, this is just what I love about this is that it's just explaining where some of these huge stories that we all know come from, and they all lead back to, well, everyone's like, well, no one considers Atlantis part of religion.
No.
It's a made-up thing. Well, it very much
could possibly be a real thing.
The origin of everything know.
It's just not what we think. Because I even in the car today told you that I thought Atlantis was literally an underground or an underwater city with a big dome.
Right.
Like
as if they were preserving it now.
Right. Like the little freaking mermaid, man. Like.
Oh my God, that's right. Oh wow, the Little Mermaid.
Well,
that was King Triton, I think.
Well, yeah,
Triton.
but
close enough.
Same diff.
I think he was Disney's versions of Poseidon.
Yeah.
And then we learned in our episode we were talking about the pitchfork or we talked about Poseidon
like,
is the
when
same
you talk
as
about
Satan.
when you were talking about Poseidon, I was going to bring that up, like the Triton, because it was
interesting, very interesting. So, do you have
wait a minute.
Any side commentary?
So Poseidon, if he's like the god of the sea, but he's really like, he's like underwater or whatever. So he's like, does that mean he's kind of like the...
Well, no, that was Hades was technically that, but that was what Atlantis became after it flooded, is technically the land of the dead, right?
Right.
Is what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that Hades didn't come into play till after, if I'm going to go by history and what I know now, after Poseidon had already sunk that city, right?
Yeah.
That's where the
Hades...
Hades...
was Poseidon evil then?
I think so. I mean, the gods, you can't really look at them as evil or good. I mean, they were just doing what they wanted to do if you're going to go by these stories, right? They did whatever the hell they wanted.
Right.
Well, because you look at the things Zeus did. I mean,
oh my God, I was just going to say something about Zeus because
he was banging everything with a pulse back at that point.
Right, but
that was the stories of Zeus.
But I always viewed Zeus as like somebody with the lightning bolts. So like as we were on our way here, it's actually I joked that it was a dark and stormy night because it's just started like lightning like crazy.
Yeah.
So. Like
raining
and
flooding and we had a flood at the link last week.
Oh my God, it's raining and flooding and like all this stuff that we're talking about right now is like with like Atlantis. It's like happening like right now. It's
in
like,
9,000 years, we'll be searching for the lost city of Las Vegas. Everybody, brace yourselves. So, oh man. All right. I'm going to continue along here, Jess, unless you have anything else you want to throw in at this point.
No, you're good.
We're good. Jess is Jess is still dissolving
like
that last
mind
bit.
blown.
Yeah, she's a lot to swallow, Jess. So just take.
Oh
your time,
God.
so.
But yes, it is. But kind of is because you know
absolutely is.
being swallowed by the sea.
Yes, I get it. All right, I see what you're getting at. All right. So
Tina's over there just red.
Tina, what's so funny?
Well, because I knew you were going to go there, but the thing that really got me cracking up is when you were talking about Disney and The Little Mermaid, and you actually knew who the king was.
No, I knew. Yeah, I mean, I knew.
I used to
I knew it wasn't Poseidon. I knew it was Triton.
I know you did. But he knew.
But Joey.
Hey, you know what? I used to
Joey
watch when I was a kid. I used to love the freaking Little Mermaid because it was an underwater city. That was amazing to me. I used to watch that all the time.
Joey made a joke today in the car about this kid a new kid that we work with. He calls him Sunshine. I was like, oh yeah, from Remember the Titans. And Joey just looked at me like, you're the first person to get that. Like,
yeah, no one knew why I called him that.
Yeah.
But all right. Let's jump back here because we have a limited amount of time, and I want to try to get to.
By the way, I'm going to call him Sunshine from now on.
You should. I call him that. He knows now. So it's fine. He gets it. He gets it. All right. So where are we at here? So, okay. So the traditions narrated by Plato exactly coincide with biblical lore based on everything we've been talking about, and also agree with prehistoric events in both geological and archaeological. That's the word. Archaeological. Say it with me. Archaeological.
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists. Okay.
Archaeologists.
Record. Okay, so it coincides with these records, and all worldwide legends trace back to India and Indonesia, no matter where we start from. And another thing I mentioned earlier, continents don't sink, the sea rises, and geologists even claim that actual sunken continents are a geological impossibility. So people that think the sinking theory, I don't believe that. And
no, it's
that's
just like the tides coming up.
Right, from the melting of the ice caps.
And swallowing.
So look at the Ice Age. You could actually look this up. I want people to Google Ice Age maps of Indonesia. Look this stuff up. You could see maps that they've created that show what is underwater now and what didn't used to be underwater.
Like in Ice Age, the meltdown?
Yes, just like that. We're going back. Well, that's DreamWorks, not Disney.
Whatever.
Well, I know way too much about this stuff.
Whatever.
Right.
Disney movies are like
close enough.
History.
Enough.
They're history.
I think is that
Pocahontas was real. So it was.
I think they slightly altered the story there.
Well, but I'm just saying they're all real. Characters are real.
All right. So, if you look at maps of this, it'll show that the South China Sea was encircled by Indonesia, formed a continent during the last glaciation around 11,600 years ago, which is the same era we're talking about. And it shows the sunken continents of Lemuria Atlantis in Indonesia, as well as the sunken strip of the Indian Atlantis at the Indus Delta. So this is purely scientific and is not based on an idea or an invention. It's just detailed geophysical reconstruction of the seafloors in the region in question. So think about continental drift when all the continents were once together, okay? And people dispersed. You have to remember, if you look at the map of the world, we all learned at some point, maybe in earth science or something, that the continents all kind of fitted together at one point before they dispersed. So imagine everybody fleeing to lands that were really close that are not there anymore. Well, that's probably how all these different stories of where Atlantis can be are all over the place. So then you have the maps that show a huge extension of the continental size, which prolongs Southeast Asia. And as Plato wrote, okay, this land was that I'm talking about here. If you look at the old maps of during the Ice Age, it was larger than Asia Minor and Libya put together, and actually about 2 to 3 times larger than continental-sized India. So it fits that exact description he's talking about of the size of it. So if Plato was in fact speaking truthfully, Atlantis, based on everything that I'm saying, could only have been located in that region of the world because it specifically it points to that area.
So the size of the continent was a lot to swallow?
Yes, it was. Good, Jess. Good. Still, I'm gonna start calling you Jessica Simpson over here. Do buffaloes have wings?
Is it chicken of the sea?
Chicken of the sea?
Or is it chicken by the sea?
Chicken by the sea.
Chicken of the sea.
No.
Is this chicken or is this tuna?
It's a little of both. It's a little of both, Jess. So, all right. Well, we had some tangents today. Enjoyable. Now I'm hungry. All right. So where are we going? I want to give people a modern depiction of this. So today, the Indonesian islands and the Malay Peninsula are the unsunken relics of the Lemurian Atlantis and the true site of paradise in all ancient traditions. So the sunken portion of continental extension now forms the muddy, shallow bottoms of the South China Sea, and it's encircled by Indonesia and forms the boundary of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. If you could follow that, that's what you're looking at on a map now. So then and now, Indonesia also formed the divide of the new and ancient worlds, which what ancients used to call Ultima Thule, or ultimate divide. That's what it meant. And it also corresponds with what our elders themed and called the Pillars of Hercules, which Jess mentioned earlier, and which according to Plato were placed just in front of Atlantis. So the Pillars of Hercules were the impassable frontier between the old and new worlds, and were also called Orient and Occident. So they were separated by the volcanic island of Indonesia, and that was formed the boundary of tectonic plates that formed the ancient and new worlds. And this is constantly mentioned by Plato and other ancient sources on Atlantis. So that is pretty much where all the confusion comes from on the location. And Plato acknowledges that he learned the legend of Atlantis from Solon, as you said, right? Mm-hmm. Who in turn got it from the Egyptians, and they in turn learned it from the Hindus of Indonesia.
Plato gets all the credit.
Well, he does, because he's one of the most famous philosophers of our time, right?
Right.
That's why he gets, I mean, someone's going to take the credit for everything, but it's not like he said he made that stuff up. You know what I mean?
No, but he gets the credit for it.
But it all stemmed back to the Hindus. And then from there also came the Aryans, the Hebrews, and the Phoenicians, the other nations that founded the civilizations of old times. And from the primordial Lemurian Atlantis that we derive all our myths and religious traditions, we derive all our science and our technology, agriculture, cattle herding, the alphabet, metallurgy, which is a fun word to say, astronomy, music, religion, and so forth. Inventions that we kind of take for granted that we have are actually really advanced, and they all came from the dawn of times, the twin Atlantises that we forgot about. But all our modern day things that we enjoy to this day, I mean, they started in this civilization, Atlantis, that was the first civilizing of humanity.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's crazy about it.
Well, the ancient Egyptians were kind of like that too. Like they
came from Atlantis after Atlantis.
Right. So everything kind of stems from that, and they built on that. All the technology and even like the Minoans too. Like, well,
right.
I guess, but
it
again,
all
everything
comes
stems from
the Atlanteans in this area. So why don't people know exactly where it goes? So humanity moved from Indonesia to the regions of Europe, and the Occidental Ocean of the Hindus became the Oriental Ocean, which at the time laid in the east. And then Hindu myths told that Atlantis sinking in the Occidental Ocean was interpreted as referring to the Atlantic Ocean, western in regards to Europe, where their new residence was. And the Hindus called the sunken continent by the name of Atala, which is strikingly similar to Atlas or Atlantis. And then there was all this confusion as to where this Atlantis was because of everybody moving everywhere.
Do you think that people believe that it is in the Atlantic Ocean because it's called Atlantis? Like, the people just kind of assume that?
Well, that is actually why they call it the Atlantic Ocean. It wasn't... Okay, so... this is another thing. The Ocean of the Atlanteans.
Reality check.
Yes. That's actually it's funny that you just said that, because I was just on that right here. It's good.
I can't see your screen.
I know. So Atlantic Ocean, which means Ocean of the Atlanteans, was the whole of the circular Earth-encompassing ocean. So we can conclude that Atlantis can be localized either in the ocean that we call by that name now, or more likely the ocean where the ancients placed their legends and navigations, which is the Indian Ocean. So the ocean they named Erythraean, Atlantic, and so on, names are related with that of Atlantis, the land of the Reds. And then the primordial Phoenicia, or Erythrea, means the red one. So it comes from that same word. And the name Atlantic Ocean is derived from Atlantis. It's not vice versa.
That's neat.
Yeah, Atlantis was first. That's where they took Atlantic Ocean from. And that far predates Plato, being mentioned by Herodotus, who wrote it in history fully a century before Plato wrote the Cretius. And as Herodotus explains, the name of Atlantic Ocean originally applied to the Indian Ocean rather than the body of water now so named. So it's on that side of the world and not on ours that we should expect to find Atlantis. Indian Ocean, that's the area where we're going to find Atlantis.
Hey, speaking of where we're going to find Atlantis, where are we not going to find Atlantis?
Well, besides here in Vegas, we're not going to find it in that Cuban underwater city we talked about off the coast of Cuba.
That was it.
That was it, Jess.
That was it. That was on my list. That's, because we brought it up a few weeks ago. We didn't say, it was off of the coast of Cuba, but it was like an underground city that most people thought was Atlantis.
Look this up, folks. Like, look Cuban underwater city up. You will see pictures. There's really pyramids that are bigger than the ones at Giza underwater. To this day, off the coast of Cuba. I think it's the southwestern part of Cuba. It's off that coast of it. That's real. And some of the stuff I found about that is they believe it happened at the end of the last ice age, and the water levels rose and submerged it.
Right.
So it's part of that same era. But this is not Atlantis. The Cuban underwater city is not Atlantis. It's not the same place. From the research we've all found, I'm telling you, the origins of humanity all came from that area in Indonesia, and it only makes sense.
You know what? I think one of these days, because we were talking about like half our staff like posting pictures of them in New York. One of these days, we're gonna just be posting pictures of us like at all these places, like the Suicide Forest and the Bermuda Triangle and
scuba
and all
diving
these places.
in the Indian
like,
Ocean.
Yeah, you guys are going. Y'all are in New York or this and that, but we're like worldly travelers.
That's why
Reality
I'd be
check.
dying to traveling
Hey,
radio show.
So I want to say this for next week. Because we lost a great man out there. This week, Prince died last week. So next week we are going to do a special Prince episode.
And there's a lot of info coming out about that, folks, and we are going
right away.
Get a lot. We're just going to get some more info for the next week and have a nice episode for you explaining what possibly really happened to Prince.
And well, kind of Michael Jackson a little bit.
Well,
so thank
we'll
you all
talk
for
about it.
listening, and we will catch you guys next
Hope you enjoyed
Wednesday.
it, folks. Have a good night.
Stand by.
You've been listening to Reality Check, the one show that doesn't prepackage and spin the truth as propaganda. Hosted by Jessica Johns and Joey Mirabella.